Welcome to Sales, Tax, and More, your go-to resource for all things state tax related. Now, here is your host, Michael Fleming.
Hi, Mike Fleming here, founder of Sales, Tax, and More, and today's co-host of the Sales, Tax, and More podcast, where we talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is, of course, sales tax. Today, my co-host, Ellie Moffat, is going to be interviewing me about the 7 pillars of sales tax success. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to Ellie.
Hey, everyone. It's really great to be here. And sales tax is definitely my favorite topic. Before we get started as well, I'm going to introduce Sales Tax and More. So Sales Tax and More is a full-service consulting and solutions firm. We have a great team here of experienced tax professionals who are very dedicated to fulfilling any of your state tax-related needs. So we do a lot of sales tax returns, sales tax registrations, consultations, research, and like our name states, more. So if you have questions about our services, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask. We will give you plenty of ways to do so in this podcast and in the podcast notes as well. So, Mike, our topic today is the 7 pillars of sales tax success. I know we have a webinar with the same name, but where do these pillars come from?
Well, great question, Ellie. And over the years, we've seen that virtually all issues in an audit can be traced back to one or more of these pillars, these 7 pillars. So when I think of a pillar, I think of something, the Roman pillars, great big sturdy constructs that are holding something up. So I think of it as a strong foundation. So our goal is to make you aware of these pillars, help you strengthen those pillars. And, having a strong pillar is not going to prevent a sales tax audit, but if you're making sure you're taking care of these pillars, if you are audited, they are going to help mitigate or, even eliminate any exposure that you do have.
So, Mike, can you tell us what those 7 pillars are?
Yeah, absolutely. So nexus, taxability, rates, use tax, exemption certificate management, registrations and sales tax returns, and then sales tax audit defense.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so you told us what they are. Can you take a few minutes to tell us why those are important?
Yeah, I guess you'd want to know that. So, nexus is the first and, perhaps most important. It's the one that generally is going to provide the most exposure because if a state finds you and you've not been registered, the past exposure is not limited to the statute of limitations. They can go back to the date that you first had nexus. Now, nexus is just a fancy word that we use to mean link or connection. And it's the link or connection with the state that has to be present before the state can require you to do anything. So knowing your nexus footprint is very important. If you don't have any links or connections with the state, you don't have a requirement to do anything. But if you do have this link or connection, then you may be required to collect and remit tax. And, in theory, a state can go back, 20 years. In reality, they only go back 7, 8, or 10 years. Now, I say that tongue in cheek, 7, 8, or 10 years is still a really long time. And they're going to want all of their back tax, penalty, and interest. So it's important that we know what our nexus footprint is. The next one is taxability. And you would not believe how many companies don't get this right. I mean, some people do a lot of research and they understand what they sell, whether it's tangible personal property or service. They understand it's where it's taxable and where it's not. But a lot of people just go off what they think or what they feel. Sometimes, they use common sense. And unfortunately, in the sales tax world, common sense doesn't always play a big part. So we see lots and lots of mistakes when it comes to, taxability issues. And these mistakes are not just made by companies, We also see, plenty of trusted advisors out there, many in the accounting field, make mistakes when it comes to taxability. Oftentimes, it involves services, and a lot of, accountants out there still think services are not taxable. And every state taxes at least some services. And where it gets really tricky is when you're mixing services and tangible personal property together. So taxability, big issue. Rates. Whose rate should we be charging? When we talk about rates, we're not actually talking about the rate itself, but where is the sale sourced? Which state's rate should we be charging? And if you're not getting the rates right, even if they're in the right state, those are red flags. So state sees you consistently getting rates wrong, you may find up that you're now a target for a sales tax audit. Use tax. Just because your vendor doesn't charge you a sales tax doesn't mean that the sale is necessarily tax-free. In instances where there's, a taxable item, if your vendor doesn't charge you sales tax, either because they don't know they have nexus or they're just not collecting the sales tax, or they may not have nexus. You're supposed to self-assess and remit it to the state directly as a use tax. And this is a huge issue. It's the number one leading cause of assessments, large assessments in audits, especially, if you're making big software purchases. Use tax can have a tremendous impact there. So, and that's followed by exemption certificates. So exemption certificate management, it's not just the collection of the certificates, but someone's got to be validating those certificates. They got to make sure that they're all on the right forms. They got to make sure they're completely filled out, that it makes sense that the certificate being provided, the exemption being asked for, is common sense. So exemption certificate management, it's either the number one or number two leading cause, depending on what type of company you are, for large audit assessments. So use tax and exemption certificate management, exemption certificates, those are the biggest problems in an audit. Not the only problems, but the biggest problems. Registrations, you need to know how to register correctly. Some states give you multiple options, and nowadays a lot of people are getting registered because of economic nexus. Generally, you're going to want to be registering for the vendor's use tax or the seller's use tax. If there's an option, don't confuse it with consumer use tax, which we just talked about. And then once you're, the reason why you want to do that, first of all, let's look at that. Vendor's use tax, usually much cheaper situation here, generally doesn't automatically make you subject to registration with the Secretary of State. It doesn't automatically require you to pay income tax. Seller's use tax, seller sales tax, generally is if you have a location in a state, where these use taxes are if you're registering and selling into the state from outside the state. So an important distinction there in some states, not all states. Some states have done away with that distinction. The other issue is when you're doing returns. Make sure that the returns you're doing match the type of registration you have. If you're filing the wrong types of returns, again, that's a red flag. And, this is important. If you're going with some of these lower tier software companies, someone like a TaxJar, they don't have the ability to file all the correct returns out there. So, if you're registered for the Oklahoma vendor's use tax and they're telling you to go back out and get registered for the sales tax, that is just wrong. And if they're filing the wrong return, red flags. Next thing you know, you're getting chosen for an audit. So registrations and returns, that's where a lot of red flags show up. You want to make sure that you're limiting these red flags. Sales tax audit defense. Now, this is usually after the fact. The biggest thing for sales tax audit defense is that you've taken care of these other 6 pillars. Because if you've taken care of these other 6 pillars, you shouldn't have very many issues in an audit. A lot of time auditors come in, though, and they're acting like you're their buddy, and, you definitely want to be friendly with them. You want to have a good professional relationship, but sometimes they're trying to get you to volunteer information, and you never want to volunteer the information. You also don't, I hear so many stories where people are putting them out in a shed in Austin, Texas, in the middle of the summer with no air conditioning, thinking that they're going to chase the auditor off, or the exact opposite, putting them in, some sort of basement with no heat in the middle of the winter in, Minnesota. The auditor's always going to get the last laugh. You definitely want to have a professional relationship with them. And they have a lot of leeway. They have a lot of latitude, and you want them not to have an antagonistic relationship with you. So audit's very, very important. Ellie, we could go into hours on each one of these pillars, but I just want to touch base and let you know why they're important.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. There's lots of great information here. There's lots more great information you could go on. So where could people find that information? Where could they find out more?
Well, you mentioned earlier that we have a webinar. So it's a 2-part webinar. Each part offers 1 CPE credit, so 2 CPA credits in whole. So there's 2 hours. But again, 2 hours is not a lot of time. So, that's the 10,000-foot overview. We definitely jam pack it with lots of information. And it is a free webinar. So you get your CPE credit for free also. So that is a great resource. And we're now going to be rolling out a webinar, a 1-hour webinar for each of these 7 pillars. We're not going to start with Nexus because we already have a number of webinars, again, complimentary, that touch on Nexus. So we're going to start with taxability and spend the whole hour talking about taxability. Now, we could probably talk 2 or 3 days about it, so we may start breaking out the taxability of different industries. But for now, we're going to do a 1-hour webinar, and that's going to become live some point in late October. And you can find all of these webinars on our website. It's under the resources tab, and you click down and it says webinars. You can see everything that we currently are offering.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I just want to kind of give everyone some information to reach out to us if they have really specific questions here. If you have sales tax needs, we offer many solutions and services, just like we stated before. You can reach out to me directly if you have questions. My email is emoffat, that's EMOFFAT, at salestaxandmore.com, or at salestaxandmore.com, yes. Or you can visit our website, www.salestaxandmore.com. Like we were talking about, in addition to our services, we don't just have this one webinar. We have a whole series of free webinars that offer CPE credit. We have paid portions of our website. We have other free resources on our website, many things to help you out on your sales tax journey here. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope you join us in the future.
Thanks, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you on the next episode of the Sales Tax and More podcast.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe and check out all of the resources we have out on the web.